a pile of digital spaceships that don't even exist yet, just sold for $48,000. And that number only makes sense if you trace it back through years of players swallowing slightly bigger insults, one battle pass and one loot box at a time, until outrage turned into habit. Somewhere between horse armor and starship invoices, the loyal fans who paid in good faith stopped noticing they'd already agreed to this. Battlefront saw 600,000 downvotes, still the most downvoted comment in the history of the platform, a tombstone for one of the worst monetization schemes ever attempted in a KDLA game. Electronic Arts launched Star Wars Battlefront II in November 2017 with progression built around loot boxes. Those boxes contained star cards that made your character objectively stronger, not cosmetic actual combat power sitting behind a slot machine. Pre-release testing showed players needed roughly 40 hours of grinding to unlock Darth Vader the honest way, or they could just pay. 40 hours for one of the most iconic villains ever put on screen unless you had a credit card, in which case it took about 4 minutes. Fans asked EA to explain itself on Reddit, and EA responded that the system gave players a sense of pride and accomplishment. That sentence still gets quoted like scripture in monetization debates. The internet buried them for it. Regulators in Belgium and the Netherlands started asking whether loot boxes were unlicensed gambling wearing a stormtrooper helmet, and EA pulled every microtransaction days before launch, then rebuilt progression from scratch. This one got beaten back because everyone could see the trick, but the next move was aimed at the most loyal, highest spending fans a studio has, and it charged them twice for something they were already promised. Escape from Tarkov. Some of Escape from Tarkov's most loyal players spent $150 on a promise, then got billed $250 to learn the promise had an asterisk. The promise was not vague. The Edge of Darkness edition advertised access to all future DLC and content in writing as the entire pitch for paying $150 up front instead of buying the base game. Not most future content, all of it. In 2024, Battlestate announced the Unheard Edition for $250, loaded with the PvE co-op mode fans had been begging for, plus extra stash space and other perks. Edge of Darkness owners expected it was already covered. Instead, PvE access sat behind a second $250 charge for a mode they technically paid for years earlier. Add that to the list. The community read it as the same shelf of content getting a new lock with the key sold separately to the people who already own the room. Where Battlefront got dragged for greed that hit every player equally, this was surgical. It targeted the smallest, most devoted, most financially invested slice of the fan base, betting they'd grumble and pay rather than walk from a game they'd already sunk hundreds into. Charging your biggest fans twice feels new and cruel, but paying real money for tiny slices of a game you already own didn't start in 2024. It started with something so small and so mocked that nobody thought it would work at all. Oblivion horse armor. Somewhere in 2006, a Bethesda executive looked at a spreadsheet and realized something horrifying. People would pay real money for a hat, not a magic hat with game-changing stats, a hat for a horse that mostly just looked different. That is the entire pitch behind Oblivion's horse armor. For about 200 Microsoft points, roughly $2.50, you got decorative plates on your horse in The Elder Scrolls 4. It technically doubled the horse's health, but nobody bought it to keep their horse alive longer. Zero new content, zero real gameplay reason, just a cosmetic skin bolted onto an animal that already worked fine. Console gamers had never seen anything like it. The internet dragged it mercilessly, mocking it as the dumbest purchase in gaming history, a punchline that outlived the console it launched on, and it sold anyway. Enough players bought it that Bethesda got the only answer that ever mattered to a publisher. Yes, we will pay for almost nothing. The mockery wasn't a failure signal. It was market research with extra steps. Somewhere, a loyal Elder Scrolls fan dropped $2 on a joke and unknowingly signed off on every nickel and dime scheme that followed. That quiet experiment is the actual origin point, the thing the last two entries were already standing on. Selling a cosmetic nobody needed was one thing, but the next move went further, taking a series built entirely on fear and scarcity, then selling you a way out of the very tension that made the game worth playing. Dead Space 3, Isaac Clarke used to run out of ammo. That was the point. In 2013, EA fixed that problem by letting you buy your way out of it for real money, and the fix is what killed him. Dead Space built its identity on scarcity. Every bullet mattered. Every bench visit felt like gambling with your survival. Then Dead Space 3 shipped with a crafting system, and right next to it, a storefront selling resource packs, so you could skip actually surviving. The tension wasn't an accident. Reports at the time revealed the scavenging drop rates were tuned low enough that grinding for parts felt like a chore, which made the real money option look like relief instead of a ripoff. That's a design brief, not a coincidence. The horse armor era just bolted greed onto a finished product. This bolted greed into the difficulty curve itself, so the dread you paid for got redesigned to sell itself back to you. Store prompts popped up mid-mission in a single-player horror game, breaking immersion on purpose. Fans hated it instantly. Some diehard who'd followed Isaac since the Ishimura found himself staring at a pause menu, asking for his credit card instead of a save point. Sales dropped. The franchise pivoted to co-op action, chased a bigger audience, and got neither back. Dead Space went dark for years. Retrospectives still cite this as the moment a beloved horror IP got gutted from the inside for extra revenue. Selling relief from a grind is bad enough, but the next move charged players for something no game had ever dared to paywall before. A feature so basic and so free that asking money for it felt like charging for the power button. Metal Gear Survive. Konami found a way to charge you for existing. Not for power, not for speed, not for looking cool in a hangar full of ships, for the basic right to have a second character exist in a game you already bought. Metal Gear Survive launched in 2018 with exactly one character save slot by default. Want a different build, a different playstyle, a fresh run? You needed a second slot and it wasn't free. Extra save slots sat behind SV coins, a premium currency you could grind out at a pace best described as geological, or you could pay real money and get it instantly. Konami built the grind slow enough that paying wasn't the shortcut, it was the intended path. A save slot costs the publisher nothing. Zero. It's a few kilobytes on a server. Dead Space made you sweat for currency mid-mission, but at least you were buying something functional. Survive skipped the middleman and charged you for the privilege of starting over. Save slots had been free since the memory card era. Nobody in 1998 imagined character number 2 costing cash. For a Metal Gear believer already grieving Kojima's exit, this felt less like business and more like an insult in coin form. Paying to restart a game is grim, but at least it's one ugly transaction you can't refuse. The next move on this list is quieter and far more permanent. It doesn't wall off starting over. It walls off getting better at something you're already playing for free. Apex Legends, a free game, just found a way to charge you for playing it for free. That sentence should not make sense, and that is exactly why it works. Apex Legends costs nothing to download, and Respawn has spent years insisting that is the whole point. Then the Legends Spotlight Pass showed up, asking for roughly $10 to unlock specific character challenges and the rewards attached to them. Progression used to be the one thing you could not buy your way past. You played, you leveled, you earned. The Spotlight Pass put a price tag on that loop, stacking a brand new paywall on top of the Battle Pass you were probably already buying, the weekly store bundles, and the heirloom events dangling above it all. Players noticed immediately, and the criticism landed hard. This was not a skin. This was the actual challenges and rewards that used to be the reason you logged in and played a game you already had installed for free. Think back to that gaming legend charging you for a scope that should have shipped in the box. That was a company charging extra on a game you paid full price for. This is a company charging extra on a game you never paid for at all, and that flips the insult inside out. No $60 receipt to point to. The base price was $0, so every added toll just feels like the cost of playing. $10 for challenges you use to just play for feels like a lot until you meet the person who spent nearly $1 million on a single game's economy on land that exists only inside a promise. Peter Molyneux. Somebody paid $900,000 for land that does not exist in a game made by a man with a documented history of promising things that also did not exist. That is not a coincidence. That is the business model working exactly as designed. Molyneux built his career on Fable and Goddess, games where the pitch always outran the product, where trees you planted were supposed to grow into legends and mostly grew into disappointment. Then he founded 22 Cans and shipped legacy built around owning in-game business land, complete with revenue sharing promises dressed up like a real estate portfolio. One buyer wired over roughly $900,000 for territory that lives entirely inside a server. Not a car, not a house deposit, a patch of digital dirt with a promised cash flow attached. That number puts Legacy among the highest publicly known prices ever paid for virtual land tied to a single game. A case study for monetization, where the product isn't fun, it's the feeling of owning an asset. That's the real shift. The Apex hid greed behind the word free. This hides it behind the word investment. Nobody has to trick you into buying a stake in your own future. You volunteer, then defend the purchase, because admitting it was a mistake means admitting nobody made you do it. Nearly $1 million on land inside a game is staggering, but it's one outlier. The final move isn't a single whale's mistake, it's a storefront priced and listed and repeatable, asking more than the cost of a car for things that don't fully exist yet. Star Citizen, $48,000. That is the price of a single digital purchase in a video game that still, after more than a decade, does not have a finished single player campaign. Not a house, not a car, though it is close. A bundle of spaceships called the Legatus Pack, sold directly by the developer for the price of a genuine luxury vehicle. Cloud Imperium Games calls it a pledge for completionist backers. What it actually is sits somewhere between a collector's tier and a dare. The pack stacks an enormous fleet of ships and extras, and a huge chunk of that fleet exists only as concept art and digital promises for a game still deep in development. Star Citizen has pulled in hundreds of millions of dollars this way, one ship sale at a time, while the finished product stays permanently on the horizon. Critics call these purchases JPEGs with extra steps, digital ownership of pixels in an unfinished world, priced like a mortgage down payment. Somewhere in that fleet is a backer who bought pack after pack, chasing the finished game promised a decade ago. Still waiting, still paying. None of this happens without permission. A shrug over a horse skin became a shrug over battle passes, then a shrug over selling players back their own save files. $48,000 is not the industry snapping. It is the industry finally asking for the number we spent 20 years proving we would pay. Every insult we let slide was a deposit on this one. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.